Greetings, my friend. Father Leo here again, and today is known as Passion Sunday, Palm Sunday, and if we were in a church building, we'd be handing out palms. But since we're not, we won't. And the next best thing is our virtual celebration, which you can tune into, and hopefully you do, and reflect on the message of today. And it's my attempt to make a connection between we today of the 21st century and the 2,000 years ago of the happening that took place outside Jerusalem, the crucifixion of Jesus. It's known as the Paschal Mystery, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. It's a whole package. And I think one of the problems we run into is we divide it up into pieces. Like you've got a pie for dinner, so you cut it up into pieces. Everybody gets a little piece. Nobody sees the whole pie. So here what we try to do is see the whole pie, not just the story of the passion of Jesus, no, but the whole story. And it makes more sense to me if we can see the whole story. You remember a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the difference between a story and a narrative. A story is of an event right here, right now, and it's an event that's happened or happening. Whereas a narrative is longer story. It's historical, if you will. Brings out the long and the big story, the more. So that's what I'm looking at today, is that we call it the Paschal Mystery, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and how that is being lived out today in suffering humanity. Suffering humanity. And the reading we have, of course, is from the Gospel according to Luke, and it is the Passion story, which tells us about the resurrection of Jesus, his condemnation by Pilate, giving in to the crowd who yelled out, "Crucify him." And then, of course, giving in to them and the crucifixion of Jesus. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Then he breathed his last, bowed his head, and died. It's a sad story, very sad story for us, because our very best friend, Jesus, is crucified. He is crucified. Now, where I want to begin today is that this is the Paschal Mystery that unfolded 2,000 years ago. That's true. But it's also unfolding today. It's unfolding today, and that's why we have to look at the world with the eyes of faith. If you don't look at it with the eyes of faith, you say primarily the war in Ukraine and Russia there and the atrocities that we read about, and you say, ain't it awful? It's terrible. Somebody should do something. Okay. But it's just a piece of the pie. It's bigger than that. It's deeper than that. Its meaning is much more significant for us who are believers. Much more. It's again, notion of the crucifixion. It's a crucifixion of Christ again. Remember, Jesus said, whatever you do unto others, you do unto me. And so to kill, to shed blood, and war is no excuse, is to do to Jesus. Do to Jesus. And that's what we're doing. That's what they are doing. And we look at our world, there's a lot of suffering in our world. Yemen and Ethiopia were at war just as Ukraine is. Thousands of people died. Blood was shed. Innocent blood. And now the two of them, Yemen and Ethiopia, have just signed a peace accord. It may last, it may not, we don't know. But the Ukraine and Russia haven't reached that point yet. But that's the point I want to make, that is, it's not just what's happening in the Ukraine. Please try to help to see, and that takes new eyes, if you will. It takes a raising of consciousness to see the more. And the more is the big picture, the narrative. And that has a lot to do with how we make sense out of this. So, all right, if we can agree that it is a continuation what took place on Good Friday. It's a continuation of that crucifixion of Christ. Jesus who said, whatever you do unto others, you do unto me. So if you're shedding innocent blood, you're doing to Jesus what was done to him 2,000 years ago, sacramentally. And so here we are now. And people wonder, well, where is God? That's the biggest question you hear today. With all the suffering in the world, not just the war in the Ukraine, but around the world there's suffering. There's starvation, droughts, floods, people dying, and all of that is coming. We've just had a group of indigenous people appear with Pope Francis in the Vatican, telling him their story of their experiences in the residential schools. It's not a pretty story. But we see how Christ was crucified in the residential schools. Yes. And that's part of our history, part of our colonization story, if you will, of the institutionalizing of indigenous children in order to take the Indian out of the Indians. And there's a lot of suffering and generations of suffering which is followed by the people as they mourn and grieve the death of their children. So there's a lot of suffering today, today's world, no matter where you look. And we as Christians, if we look at that world with the eyes of faith, we see the big narrative. We see the big story, the history story. And we can put it in the context. We have some place to locate it. And we locate it in the Paschal mystery, the death and resurrection of Jesus, and the crucifixion. And so first of all, what we see is the incarnation truly tells us that God became human. It also tells us that humans became God. It's all one and the same. Where you have humans, you've got God. Where you've got God, you could have humans. So it's all the same. And there's no separation. Used to be we had God up in heaven and people down on earth. But that's long gone. People don't see that anymore. They realize it's old-time religion, and they let it go. So, first of all, what I see in this is the sufferings of God. Where is God? God is suffering in the pain and the suffering of the Ukraine people, the suffering of the Ukrainian soldiers who have been killed, the shedding of their blood, the shedding of the blood of the Russians. I think of the parents of those Russian soldiers at home in Russia, and with the canceling of news, they really don't know what's happened to their sons. Are they living or dead? They don't know. A lot of them are dead. A lot of them are, in fact, dead and will not be going home. So there's a lot of grief there as well. So, and that's, of course, the big thing with eyes of faith. We can look and see that as well. So it's not that the suffering is set aside for only one people, the Ukrainian people. It's all the people. It's all the people. Just as here in Canada, the suffering wasn't just for one tribe, but for many of the tribes whose children were taken and put in residential schools or were part of that scoop that took place where they were adopted by families. So yeah, there's a lot of suffering in between with poverty and so on. But the first point I want to make is there's God. Where there is this kind of unnecessary suffering, you find God. It's unnecessary that there be a war. It's unnecessary for the residential schools to take the Indian out of the Indian. All that stuff was unnecessary. But the fact is it did happen, is happening. But God is there, suffering. Our God is many things, but God is a suffering God as well, with us in our suffering. In whatever way then that we can search and find God in our suffering, in the suffering of the world. Where do we see God? And I see so much signs not just of the suffering God, but the compassionate God. Pope Francis offering an apology, saying, I'm sorry. There we have your compassionate God. And the people who are raising money and food and supplies for the Ukrainian people. Tremendous outpouring of charity, of kindness and compassion. I see an outpouring of justice where people are trying to bring about a peace. So there's the signs of God as well. So you see more than one aspect of God. Yes, you see the suffering God. You see the compassionate God. You see the God who's with people in their pain and the God who's there alleviating pain. So you see God from many different sides. That's number one. The second, I talked about the shedding of blood. And maybe, just maybe, when you reflect on this, remember, all is one. I've said that 100 times. You don't separate. Separation is a bad word when it comes to talking about God and creation. So we talk about the shedding of blood. Jesus shed his blood on Calvary. Jesus being crucified again in the war in the Ukraine. Jesus being crucified again. There is a shedding of blood. And as we gather here today, hopefully we can see this connection that sacramentally, through the sacrament of the Eucharist, you will hear me pick up the chalice with wine in it. And I'll say the words that Jesus said 2,000 years ago. This is my blood poured out for you and for all. This is the chalice of my blood poured out for you and for all. Jesus shedding his blood on Calvary. And I want you to understand that sacramentally we're one with the Ukraine people who are shedding their blood. We're one with the people in Yemen and Ethiopia who shed their blood. There's only one blood, and that's the blood of Christ that flows in our veins, in our arteries, and through our body. There's only one blood. There's only one of everything. And so when we take that consecrated wine and I say the blood of Christ, and you answer, it is, we are. Did you notice we don't say I am? We said we are. There's a big difference, isn't there? We are admitting it's one. We all are. The blood of Christ. And somehow it bonds us. It bonds us to the people who have the blood of Christ and that is shedding that blood by being killed in war or violence of any kind, shedding blood. It's the blood of Christ. And it's the shedding of blood which bonds us with one with them. And hopefully in bonding us one with them, that we stand in solidarity with the people who suffer, period. Stand in solidarity. And, from there, I don't know, what do we do? Is there something we can do? It could be that we contribute some way for donations or something for the people in the war in Ukraine. We have that old expression, development and peace. Think globally, act locally. Well, maybe we can see the shedding of blood or the suffering of people close to home. And their blood is our blood. And we can maybe reach out to them in some way. And doing so, at least we stand in solidarity with them. We are in correspondence with them. And maybe we can alleviate some of their suffering. That too might be possible. So this is really I guess I have to say, for me anyway, it's a sad Sunday. It's a sad Sunday because my friend Jesus, we're reminded that Jesus is still crucified anew in the war and the violence of the world. And if you read today's newspaper, where people have picked up a gun and gone to a crowded place and started shooting and killing people in our own Western world here. Still mass shootings. So yeah, like blood is being shed right here in our own soil. The grieving over bloodshed of our native people. And we are standing in solidarity with them, recognizing the two things. God is there in the suffering. That's where God is. You can't separate God from people. That's the story of Christmas. That's the incarnation. We can't do that. We must not do that. This is our God. Secondly, the shedding of blood. Sacramentally, we are bonded there. This is the chalice of my blood, poured out for you and for all of humankind. And we answer, it is. We are. We are the blood of Christ, as are the people who suffer and whose blood is being shed. And we are one with them. And whatever that means to us, whatever my response is, I don't know. It'll be different amongst every community. And our community maybe needs to talk about what can we do, and to alleviate any sense of I'm helplessness, to pick up on that theme from Development and Peace. Think globally, act globally. So if we can't act globally, we can act locally. And in that way, we just don't nod our heads at Passion Sunday and say, well, same old, same old. It ain't the same old, boys. This is not the same old. This is new wine into new wineskins. And somehow it's meant to inspire us to grow, to see what we never saw before, to see what and to acknowledge what we never acknowledged before, and to see the connections. That's the big thing, is seeing the connections. And in seeing the connections, that somehow we are inspired. We are inspired to find meaning and to do life differently. And so here we are, Holy Week begins today, Thursday evening at 4 o'clock. We have our Mass of the Lord's Supper at 4 o'clock on Zoom. On Good Friday, we have the Good Friday service at 3 o'clock on Zoom. And Easter Sunday Mass, the Resurrection, at 9:30 Sunday morning. And that's our Holy Week that lies ahead. So God bless, and I hope you can participate and take an active role in Holy Week this year. God bless. Bye-bye.